everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. And thank you for joining us on this webinar of today that is titled From 26 to 80 Plus Fragrance Allergens, Scientific, Regulatory and Industrial Perspective in the Year of the Regulations Entering Force. Presented by Neotron and Toxhub. So I'm Luca Vogesi, I'm the Head of Marketing Business Development here in Neotron, and I'm your host for today's session. As I just typed to you in the chat, if you have any question in the middle of the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A box, and we will address these questions toward the end of our program. Let me say that before diving into the main agenda, let's introduce our speakers of today. So you can see Irene Cotogni, that is the cosmetic specialist at Neotron. And we are proud to have here today also Carla Landolfi, the founder and the CEO of Toxhub. So we are ready to go into the agenda of today. You can see in the slides, we are making a very quick corporate and Neutron overview. It takes 1 minute, not more. And then we deep dive into the topic of today, so the regulatory overview, the toxicology aspect of allergens and the risk management, and impact of cosmetic allergens among the supply chain. Analysis insight, and then we reserve the last part for the Q&A session. So, as I said, we start with a little presentation about Cotecna and Neotron. Just to give you a brief introduction of Cotecna, is a leading provider in testing, inspection, and certification services dedicated to making the supply chain safer and more efficient. It's a company located in Geneva, Switzerland, with offices and labs worldwide. We have more than 6,200 employees all around more than 180 plus offices all around the world. So as you can see, covering different type of services from food, pharma, agriculture, minerals, certification, a lot of things. We can go with Neotron. And as you can see here, we have a clear picture of Neotron. We have more than 500 employees in the site of Modena with a 10,000 square meters laboratory receiving more than 1,000 samples per day. If you go to the next slides, we can give you a little overview of the different segments that we can cover in terms of testing. So we go from baby food to food supplements, food ingredients, cosmetic, sensory analysis, and we have also a GMP division dedicated for pharma, and surely a food contact materials that goes from food to pharmaceutical. So after this little introduction about Neotron, but before starting the session of Carla with a Toxhub presentation, let's do a sort of poll. It's a sort of icebreaker to better understand your needs. So each of you will shortly see a question on your screen, and we ask you to select an answer that is for you most appropriate. And we will have in a minute, giving you a minute to complete this poll, and we will have a breakdown of the responses. So feel free to reply at this first question, and we will discuss about it in a minute. Okay, is now seeing the progression of the results. Okay, done. So very interesting questions, and your answer. It was very surprising for us, but always, let me say, a good starting point also for you, Carla, for your presentation in order to cover these points that our attendees highlight in the answer. So I think that now, Carla, I leave the floor to you, and that can also cover some of the, let me say, reply to the question and also needs that our participants highlight to us in this first poll. So Carla, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. Let me share my screen. Can you see the screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, first of all, good morning, everyone. and I would like to thank Neotron and Cotecna for the kind invitation and for organizing this webinar. Today, I will talk about fragrance allergens in cosmetics, focusing on the recent regulatory changes that have expanded the list from 26 to 20 or 21 or 22, depending by the isomers. And so during this presentation, we will review the main regulatory and toxicological aspects related to fragrance allergens in cosmetic products. My intention is to focus on skin sensitization as the key toxicological effect associated with these substances. We will look at how the regulation has evolved over time in response to increasing scientific knowledge on sensitization and why it represents a critical endpoint for consumer safety. Finally, we will discuss the practical implication of these changes for industry, safety assessor, and manufacturers, highlighting how scientific assessment supports regulatory compliance and safe use of cosmetic products. First, it's important to clearly understand what we are fragrances and fragrance ingredients. A fragrance is not a single substance, but a complex mixture of many individual ingredients. These ingredients can be natural or synthetic, and each one contributes to the final smell, stability, and performance of the products. Fragrance substances are organic compounds with characteristic pleasant odors. They are widely used in cosmetics, especially in parfums and personal care products. But they are also present in many everyday products such as detergents and household cleaners, not only cosmetics. This means that the consumer exposure to fragrance ingredients is frequent and often repeated. Among these ingredients, some have the ability to cause skin sensitization and allergic contact dermatitis. These substances are called fragrance allergens. From a toxicological perspective, they are not dangerous for everyone, but they can trigger allergic reactions in susceptible people. These substances are identified based on clinical evidence and toxicological data. Because of their ability to cause allergic reactions in some individuals, fragrance ingredients have received increasing attention over the years. Before the 90s, fragrances were mainly considered from a performance and consumer perspective, and they were not specific. There were no specific lists for labeling for fragrance allergens. As clinical evidence of contact allergy increased, scientists recognized that some fragrance ingredients could act as skin sensitizers. This led to an important regulatory step in 2003 when the European Union introduced the obligation to declare 26 specific fragrance allergens on product labels to help consumers recognize and avoid substances to which they are allergic. Later, new scientific evidence showed that this list was not sufficient, and finally in 2023 the regulation was updated, expanding the list from 26 to 80 or more, considering isomers and isomers allergens. With the new obligations now entering into force. Let's see the clinical impact of allergens. Fragrance ingredients can cause different types of skin reactions, and these reactions don't always look the same. The most common reaction is allergic contact dermatitis. This is a delayed immune reaction that usually develops after repeated exposure to a sensitizing fragrance substance in general. It typically appears as redness, itching, and inflammation of the skin. However, fragrances can also cause other types of reactions. For example, irritant contact dermatitis that is caused by direct irritation of the skin, and it does not involve the immune system. Some substances can also cause photosensitivity, meaning that the reaction appears only after exposure to sunlight. In some cases, reactions can occur very quickly, within few minutes, for example, the contact urticaria, or other after some days from the contact or after repeated exposure. A less common reaction include persistent skin pigmentation or reactions caused by airborne exposure. It's important to distinguish between skin sensitization and contact allergy, because they describe two different steps of the same process. Skin sensitization is the biological phase in which the immune system becomes trained to recognize a substance as harmful, usually without visible symptoms. Contact allergy, instead, is the clinical reaction that occurs after the re-exposure in a sensitized person, for example, redness, itching, or eczema again. So, in simple terms, sensitization is the process, while contact allergy is the visible reaction. Skin sensitization is an immunological process that develops over time. It does not usually happen after the first exposure to a substance. Instead, repeated contact with the same chemical, even at very low doses, can lead the immune system to recognize it as harmful. Fragrance ingredients are among the most common causes of allergic contact dermatitis, particularly because cosmetic products are applied directly to the skin and often used repeatedly. It's also important to remember that not everyone reacts in the same way. Only susceptible individuals develop sensitization. However, once a person becomes sensitized, even a very small amount of the substance, as I told you before, may be enough to trigger a reaction. Contact allergy, that is the clinical reaction, is then considered a lifelong condition, because once the immune system becomes sensitized, the reaction can occur again whenever the person is exposed to the same substance. From a public health perspective, this is not a rare event. In Europe, it's estimated that between 1 and 9% of the population is allergic to fragrance allergens. Another key point is that after sensitization, the threshold becomes much lower, since a very small amount of the substance which was previously tolerated may later be enough to trigger a reaction. And for this reason, prevention, risk assessment, and clear labeling are essential, fundamental to protect sensitized individuals and support the safe use of cosmetic products. The risk of sensitization and contact allergy from cosmetic products can be managed through different preventive measures. These measures are usually divided into main approaches called primary and secondary prevention. Primary prevention focus on reducing the risk of sensitization before it occurs. This is done by restricting or limiting certain fragrance allergens, using safe concentration levels based on scientific data, and carefully selecting ingredients with a lower sensitization potential, especially when the cosmetic product is intended for sensitive populations such as children. Risk assessment plays a key role during product development, and formulations may need to be updated when new scientific evidence becomes available, especially. Secondary prevention focuses on protecting sensitized individuals. The most important tool is a clear and transparent label. By providing information on the presence of fragrance allergens in the product, consumers can identify and avoid the substances to which they are allergic. So, effective risk management is not based on a single measure, but on a combination of scientific evaluations, regulatory control, and clear communication to consumers. Let us now look more closely at these topics, starting with the primary prevention. In this phase, I'm not referring only to fragrance allergens, but to the sensitization risk that can be caused by all ingredients used in the product. Primary prevention of skin sensitization involves different stakeholders working together across the supply chain. First, raw material manufacturers, they are responsible for ensuring the quality of the ingredients and for generating safety data on their substances. Second, finished product companies, they need to select ingredients carefully and design formulations, finding a balance between satisfying the market, the consumer needs, and maintaining safety. And finally, the safety assessor or toxicologist like me, he or she has the responsibility to evaluate the safety of the product before it is placed on the market. Each stakeholder plays a specific role, and effective prevention depends on collaboration between all of them. In particular, let me focus on the role of the toxicologist. That is my work. The safety of a cosmetic product must always be evaluated considering the whole formulation, interactions between components, concentration levels, exposure conditions, and the intended use of the product altogether play a role in determining the final safety profile. It's also important to emphasize that the absence of a substance from the list of the 20 fragrance allergens does not automatically means that there is no risk of sensitization. Other ingredients or impurities may still contribute to a risk for sensitization, which is why a comprehensive scientific assessment remains essential. In the next slides, we will look at how skin sensitization is evaluated, including the scientific approaches and the main challenges. To understand the testing strategies, it's important to first understand the biological process behind skin sensitization. This process is described using the concept of adverse outcome pathway, or AOP. which explains how a chemical interaction at the moment at the molecular level can lead to a clinical reaction in humans. Skin sensitization is not a single event, but a process that occurs in two main phases called induction and elicitation. The induction phase starts when the skin is exposed to a substance for the first time. During this phase, the immune system learns to recognize the chemical. This process takes time, usually from about 10 days to several weeks, it depends by the person, and ends when the person becomes sensitized. The second phase, called elicitation, begins when the person is exposed again to the same substance. At this point, the immune system reacts much faster, and the clinical symptoms of allergic contact dermatitis can appear even within a few minutes. The process starts when a chemical binds to proteins in the skin. This is called key event 1. Small reactive molecules attached to skin proteins and form a new structure that the immune system can recognize, starting the sensitization process. Then skin cells called keratinocytes become activated and release signals such as interleukin 1 alpha or 18 and 18 that alert the immune system. Next, in the key event 3, specialized immune cells present the modified proteins to T cell, which leads to the formation of memory cells. These memory cells remain in the body. Finally, when the person is exposed again to the same substance, these memory cells trigger an inflammatory reaction, which appears clinically as allergic contact dermatitis. This figure shows the overall process of skin sensitization assessment and how different types of tests, from in silico to in vivo, can be used to evaluate each step of the pathway. In the past, safety assessor relied mainly on human studies performing the RIPT test or animal testing, such as the guinea pig test and the LNA local lymph node assay in mice. These methods were used for many years to identify substances that could cause skin sensitization. However, in the field of cosmetics, the situation has changed significantly because we cannot use anymore animal testing for cosmetic ingredients, new cosmetic ingredients or cosmetic products. Human tests, such as the RIPT, are considered ethically sensitive because a person who is not sensitized to a substance may become sensitized as a result of the test. As a result, the evaluation of skin sensitization must now rely only on non-animal or clinical methods, clinical at least for the new substances. Today, the assessment is based on in silico and in vitro approaches, and the results from these methods are integrated to reach a final conclusion. These tools you can see listed here have been specifically developed to predict a specific key biological event described in the previous slide in the skin sensitization pathway. Ideally, tests should cover all the key events involved in the sensitization process to give a reliable result. It's also important to select the right test depending on the type of material we are evaluating, because different substances may require different testing strategy. Just few words about the strategy, in line with what we discussed in the previous slide. To determine whether a compound is or is not a skin sensitizer without the use of animal testing, we needed to combine different types of information. To assess skin sensitization, a defined approach is a structured way to integrate data from multiple sources, such as in chemical, in vitro, or in silico methods, and each method provides information on a specific biological step. Defined approaches are now formally recognized at the international level, as described in the OECD Guideline 497, which is the key milestone in the transition toward non-animal testing. The figure you see here in this slide, that is from the OECD, shows a practical decision tree used in the defined approach, called the 2 out of the 3 strategy. The process starts by performing any 2 tests that address the 3 key events in the skin sensitization pathway. If the result from this test are consistent and clearly positive or negative, the conclusion can be made directly, and the substance can be classified as a sensitizer or a non-sensitizer. If the first 2 results are not consistent, or if one result is borderline, a third test is performed to complete the evaluation of the remaining key event. At that point, if 2 results are again consistent, a final conclusion can still be reached. However, if the results remain conflicting or unclear, the assessment is considered again inconclusive, and additional data or information may be needed, performing, for example, in silico assessment or other kind of test. Well, now let us change topic, move from primary prevention to secondary prevention. So far, we focus on how to prevent the development of sensitization in general population, generally trying to reduce the risk of cosmetic products having sensitizing potential through careful ingredient selection and safety assessment. Secondary prevention instead focuses on protecting individuals who are already sensitized, or in any case on preventing the occurrence of allergic reactions after exposure to non-sensitizers. This is mainly achieved by providing accurate information on the presence of specific fragrance allergens, so that sensitized consumers can recognize and avoid the substances to which they are allergic. As mentioned before, in Europe, allergen labeling in cosmetic products is strictly regulated under Regulation 1223/2009. Recognized allergenic substances are listed in Annex 3 of this regulation, and when the substances are present above specific thresholds, their disclosure on the product label becomes mandatory. The main objective is to inform consumers and help preventing allergic reactions. Annex 3 has now been updated to include the list of 80 fragrance allergens. However, the labeling thresholds, which are different depending on the type of product, have remained the same. For leaf product, the threshold is always 0.001%. And for rinse-off products, the higher threshold at 0.01% is maintained. As you know, these thresholds are designed to reflect the different exposure condition associated with the duration of contact with the skin. To respond to the need for clear information for consumers and at the same time to manage the practical limitation of space on cosmetic labels, the regulation introduced a new labeling approach. Traditionally, allergens were detected using the standalone approach. In that case, each allergen is listed individually using its specific INCI name and specified in the Annex 3. This method is still used, however, with the expansion of the list to 80 fragrance allergens, the number of substances to be declared has increased significantly. This created a practical challenge because ingredient lists could become very long and difficult to read and also difficult to write in the label. For the reason, a new regulatory concept was introduced called the group name approach. In this case, a single INCI name can represent a group of related substances, often mixtures derived from the same plant species. And from a consumer perspective, the most important information is not the individual chemical detail, but knowing which group of substances may have the same allergic potential. Here we can see a couple of practical examples of how the new allergen labeling approach is applied in the regulation using the group name concept. In the first example, the complex substance Cedrus atlantica oil and extract may include several individual ingredients with the different INCI names derived from the same plants. In this case, they don't need to be listed separately. The same approach in the second example, the fragrance is in this case Miroxylon balsamum, also known as Peru balsamo. It is a complex natural mixture that contains several allergic constituents. Rather than listing each individual substance, the group name is used to simplify labeling, writing, and comprehension. The extension of allergen labeling clearly improves transparency and helps consumers make informed choices. However, it also creates practical challenges for product design and communication. The first and most visible impact is that labels become longer. This can be particularly challenging for brands that promote simple or minimal formulations because there may be a mismatch between the philosophy of simplicity and very long INCI list. Another important aspect is product performance. Reducing or removing certain allergens can affect the identity of a fragrance and its sensorial profile. In some cases, this may lead to fragrances that are less intense or slightly different from the original formulation. So the challenge is for companies to find the right balance between safety, regulatory compliance, product performance, and a clear communication to consumers. In conclusion, the new allergen requirements represent an important evolution in consumer protection and transparency. They help sensitize individuals, make informed choices, and support the prevention of allergic reactions. At the same time, these changes create new challenges for companies. The impact is not limited to the regulatory compliance. It also affects formulation strategies, packaging constraints, marketing communications, and even the sensorial performance of the product. From a scientific and regulatory perspective, it is essential to move beyond a simple checklist approach. Allergen management should be based on a comprehensive risk assessment that considers all potential sources of allergens, including fragrances, plant extract, and impurities. Finally, the objective is to find the right balance between safety, product quality, and clear communication to consumers. Before concluding, I would like to briefly introduce who we are and how we can support you in this context. Toxhub is part of the Cotecna Group with strong expertise in skin sensitization. Within the group, we combine toxicological competence with the testing capabilities, including in vitro and in silico methods, to support risk assessment, regulatory compliance, and the safe development of cosmetic products. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much, Carla. It was always today a way to learning something more. So thank you very much. Before proceeding with the speech of Irene, I think that we are ready for the poll 2. So another question for you. You will see in a few minutes on your screen. So the question is, have you already analyzed the new allergens? So as we have done previously, a very quick minutes to reply to the question, and then we'll see some results. Okay, so we have 31, 35, just 30 seconds more. I think that this is quite related to the speech of Irene in few minutes, because we noticed that rely on supplier list is not always, let me say, possible in some cases or useful in terms of safety. So, Irene, I think that the floor is yours, and you will see also the answer of our guests of today. So I think that you can emphasize some aspects that we have already seen in this process. So the floor is yours, Irene.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Carla, for your interesting insight about the scientific and toxicological aspect of allergens. Let's start into the deep with the practical suggestions to cosmetic companies and raw material manufacturers how to face this new amendment of the new regulation. First of all, you know that the new allergens are not a single regulation, but it is an amendment of the cosmetic regulation, and the first deadline for cosmetic products placed in the market for the first time is incoming in few months, while for cosmetic products already in the market before the entering force of the regulation, the deadline will be in 2 years. For all the product, in the end, the deadline will be in 2 years. Next slide, please. But who is in charge of implementing the compliance of this new regulation? But, well, you have to consider that the new regulation impact on finished cosmetic product. In fact, it add new allergens in Annex 3 of the cosmetic regulation. But as we can see also from the answers, a lot of cosmetic companies only rely on raw material supply, on the fragrances of the allergens list supplied by their raw material suppliers. This can be enough, but this is not enough. Sorry, we have some evidences that it is better also to check the allergens in the finished product. For sure, this is necessary and the first approach, and for sure there must be a synergy and a constant dialogue between producer of finished cosmetic companies and producer of raw material. Next slide, please. Let's go into the deep why it is important that the first line of analysis should be made by the raw materials manufacturer. For the reason I mentioned just before, because finished cosmetic companies rely on the supplier on the allergen list supplied by their raw material suppliers. And what is important to keep in mind that, well, the first task is to update the allergen list. To do this, the raw material companies should analyze their ingredients, not only fragrances, like Carla explained well before, but only botanical extract, vegetable extract, because the most of the new allergens are natural substances, and they may be found also in vegetable extract, for example, floral water, extract with some specific solvents, and so on. And please keep in mind that blends that are already ingredients, cosmetic ingredient, and they have their own inky name, are made by other substances, single substances, which can be allergens. So it is important to detect allergens also in this mixture, which are already allergens, because finished cosmetic companies have to declare all the allergens, not only the mixture, but also the substances contained in this mixture. For example, the citrus aurancio amara leaf oil, or the citrus lemon essential oil, which are the essential oil of orange and of lemon. Next slide, please. But it's important also to consider that also finished cosmetic products companies have some specific tasks. First of all, of course, and we saw this from the first poll, the main problem is to update the label. And Carla explained some problems related to the labels. And of course, remind that digital labeling is not possible, at least for now. But the important thing is that formulators, and so responsible persons, cannot pay attention not only to fragrances, but also to those ingredients coming from the vegetal world in which allergen may be present. This is why the cosmetic companies need to have a constant dialogue with suppliers, but also consider the possibility to doing analysis on the finished product, because it is important to check if the calculation of the content of allergen based on the list supplied by the suppliers is correct with analytical evidences. And this is very, I see that quite good percentage of respondents said that they analyze also their finished cosmetic product. And this is a good thing, because it's also part of a broader strategy of quality control. Next slide, please. There is not only task about analysis, but also, and labels, of course, but there are also tasks for cosmetic companies about the updating of the product information file and the CPMP. Why? Well, because, of course, new allergens are present mostly in fragrances, but not only. So you can rely on the IFRA certificate, which is a sort of safety assurance provided by the fragrances manufacturer. But you should also adding the new toxicological evaluation about the new allergens, which are not present in fragrances, but present, for example, in vegetable extract. And Carla gave us a strong method to evaluate their toxicological safety. Not only, you have the cosmetic companies have also to update the CPNP, at least because they have to update the imaging of the labels into the registration. These may seem not important tasks, but in the end they are, because product information file and CPNP are the documents that declare that a finished cosmetic product is a safe product for the human health, and CPNP is the first line for inspector to verify the compliance to the regulation. Next slide, please. Keep this slide as a summarizing a guideline of the practical aspect of the new regulation. Fortunately, there is no change in formulation. There are no problem in production or getting new raw materials, but raw materials manufacturers and finished cosmetic companies must keep in mind their own specific task. For raw material suppliers, the cost of analysis, the updating of their allergen list and their documents. For cosmetic companies, the updating of the label, the updating of the product information file, the updating of CPNP, but also the possibility to analyze their products. Next slide, please. 2 words about the impact for consumers. For sure, this regulation was made to make consumer more aware about the sensitization risk, as Carla explained, but this may cause some confusion in some consumer. And it is important that there is a strong communication in which probably cosmetic companies bear this burden to communicate that this new regulation, this new adding of new ingredients for them, they are new ingredients, are not a declaration of a more dangerous products, but it's a declaration to make consumer aware of what substances are present in our product that can potentially make some done to predisposed people for allergies. I think that cosmetic companies should also learn how to communicate these scientific matters, these scientific topics to the consumer in order to appear more reliable and in order to increase the trust of consumer into their product, because and I am absolutely sure of this, cosmetic products are safe for consumers. So, but we need to communicate very well to our consumers. Next slide, please. Let's see what happens outside Europe, because this is a European regulation. Well, in US, there is a mention in the Modernization of Cosmetic Regulation Act about the allergens in Europe, but in fact, we are still waiting for the FDA to issue their own list of allergens. We will see in the future. We hope that there will be the European allergens, and in California there is a mention of the European allergen. You have the cosmetic company have to mention the allergens, the European allergens in their registration. But in fact, we have to see if there will be more allergens or less, or we will see. While in another area of the world, in the Middle East, we know that Middle East strictly follows the European regulation, and in fact, the United Arab Emirates has already set the deadlines for receiving the new European regulation, while Saudi Arabia has not done this yet, but the trend is the harmonization with the European regulation. In any case, new requirements do not affect existing registration, and this is explicitly declared by the authorities. Next slide, please. Again, a list of suggestions of what you have to do with the documents, labels, CPMP, and product information file. Remember the threshold limits. Remember to add the toxicological evaluation of the new declared substances not present in fragrances, because in fragrances you rely on IFRA certificate, but present, for example, in vegetable extract. Next slide, please. Let's go into the deep in the analysis. As told before, who should make the analysis? Of course, raw material manufacturer, fragrances, essential oil plant extract manufacturer, producer of scented waters, and please remember that new entries are mixture of substances. You have to analyze also the mixture which are already allergens and they have their own INCI name. Next slide. And for sure, and I am very happy that a lot of you are doing this, it is important also to check the real presence of allergens in the finished product, and in order to be sure to have analytical evidences of what you are declaring on the label. Also because in the end, inspector will detect the allergens not from raw materials, but in finished cosmetic product. So very good, and please consider to do this at least as a sample, not for every batch, but at least with a defined period of checking in a major plan of quality control. Please, next slide. This is an example of what happens in your finished product. I know that you are saying about the cosmetic product should be stable and there shouldn't be any chemical reaction to transform one allergen into another one, but we have evidences of this, and maybe there is, yes, you can detect some changes also in organoleptic characteristics, but sometimes no. So you think from an organoleptic point of view that your product is stable, but maybe from a chemical point of view, it is not, because some of the allergens transform into other ones. Next step, please. Next slide, please. Sorry. This is a reminder of the current state. The allergen list, as Carla told, are 80 plus, because there are some different methods of calculation. And remember the threshold limits, 0.001 for leave-on products and 0.01 for rinse-off products. Please, next slide. In Neotron, we have these parameters. This is why I told 81, because we are able to discriminate between the two isomers of citral, which are geraniol and neral. There are other isomers which are instead considered as one molecule. This list has been taken by a standard which is specific for fragrancy. We took this standard and adapted it for finished cosmetic product, but also raw materials. Next slide, please. An overview of the method. There is a first step of homogenization, and this allows us to treat with all types of matrices, not only raw material, as I told, but also finished cosmetic product. Second step of a solvent extraction and the detection through gas chromatography and mass spectrometry. Why the combination of these two techniques? Next slide, please. Because they can rely the most reliable result. In fact, next slide, please. You can see here the parameters of our tools. You can see here the example of why GSIC technique is so sensitive, because it can discriminate between two isomers of the same substance. But next slide. Where the retention time, and it happens, of two different substances is the same, the mass spectrometry can help us to discriminate between two substances. In this case, anethol and beta-dagaxenone have the same retention time in gas chromatography, so we cannot see them divided, but we can see them in a mass spectrometry. Next slide, please. Here you can find some key points to evaluate the method performance. Next slide. First of all, through the method of strengthening of samples, we are able to reach the limit imposed by the new regulation, which are 10 milligram for kilos, 10 ppm, but we can reach also 5 ppm, and in some cases also 1 ppm, not only on finished cosmetic product, but also on raw materials. Next slide, please. The linearity has been used to validate the method to measure the precision and the accuracy of the method. Next slide, please. But we perform every time control of the validation itself is not enough. We constantly perform checking of our method through this some chemical method to rely for every batch the most reliable result and the most accurate detection of the limit. To do this, we use some techniques like the strengthening of the sample to internal standard, some checking on the blank, some chemical methods which are very specific and which assures the very reliability of the method. Next slide, please. As I told you, we have a case study quite significant, quite relevant. During a stability test, we detect a change in the odor. In that case, there was a change in the odor. And we discovered that this change was due to the transformation of not only, but the most of this was, the main reason was this, the transformation of linaloyl acetate, which was present in the fragrance, into linalool. In fact, the concentration of linalool increased in the finished cosmetic product. This is why it is very important to detect not only the allergens in raw material, but also on finished product. And it is very important to integrate the stability test with chemical test, because they can reveal a lot of your products in a microscopic point of view. Let's pass to the next slide, to the conclusion. Our method is fully compliant with the new EU regulation. Of course, we detect the allergens which are substances and not mixture, because it is not possible to detect the mixture. But as me and Carla told, this mixture can contain the allergen substances. The GC, the gas chromatography, MS, mass spectrometry technique guarantees robust and reliable results, and we recommend to detect allergens not only on raw material, but also on finished cosmetic product. Final slide, please. Thanks a lot for your attention.
So thank you, Irene, and we are a little bit in delay, so we need 5 minutes more for the Q&A session, so we can start. No problem, Carla. It was a very dense topic today, so it can happen. So during the registration process of you guys, of all of you, we have received some questions in the registration process, and we can go through it. So the first one is, what are the main allergens to avoid or keep in mind while selecting any fragrance and their serious impact on health? This is for you, I think, Irene.
Yes. Carla, in fact, mentioned this in her presentation. Allergens are not dangerous for not allergic people. They are not dangerous for people like me. I am lucky that I have no problem of allergies. They must be dangerous for some predisposed people. Actually, no one of them should be avoided, and no one of them has a serious impact on health, except for allergic people. How do allergic people discover they are allergic? Through the patch test, which is a dermatological test. Allergic people who perform patch test will be aware of which substances they are allergic to, and then simply have to avoid those substances. This is why it's very important to declare the allergens into the label, because they can read the list, and if they find an allergen, a substance they are allergic to, they simply avoid that cosmetic.
Thank you, Irene. So we go into the second one that we received during the registration process. So do you think the fine approaches you describe are now mature enough to fully replace animal testing for skin sensitization in all regulatory contexts? That's for you, Carla.
Yes. First of all, I would say that in the cosmetic sector, the use of alternative methods is not a choice, is a regulatory obligation. So animal testing for cosmetic ingredient and finished products is prohibited. Skin sensitization, as I mentioned during the presentation, is a critical endpoint, also because it's highly subjective. As we discussed, individual susceptibility plays a major role, and different people may react differently to the same substance or exposure level. I'm not allergic like Irene, so I don't know this situation, but for this reason, I would say that no single model can perfectly predict the response in every individual. So all available methods, both in vitro and in silico, have strengths but also limitations, considering the different formulation, different ingredients, physical properties, and so on, and mechanism of action. However, when these approaches are combined within a structure framework, such as those described in the final approach, they can provide a reliable and scientifically robust results. That said, in toxicological, we should never speak about zero risk for each, for any endpoint. For sensitization, particularly, the realistic objective is to demonstrate that the risk is low and acceptable under the intended conditions of use based on the comprehensive evaluation of all available data.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you very much. So the third one is there any need, is there a need to update the registration outside Europe? Irene, can you take it?
Yeah, I can take it. Well, actually, I mentioned in my previous slide, Middle East said no, there is no necessity to update the registration, but of course, only if there is the need to declare the labels, like in the CPNP, you have to update the labels. So you don't have to modify your registration, but to keep in mind that if the registration requires the labels to put the images of the label, it is better to update the labels.
Thank you very much, Irene. The last one we promised, and then let you go. Is how is the expansion of allergens labeling influencing formulation strategy in the cosmetic industry? That's for you, Carla.
Yeah, as I mentioned through my presentation, the challenge for companies is to find the right balance between safety, regulatory compliance, product performance, and the clear communication to consumer. The expansion of allergen labeling is influencing formulation strategies. First of all, because the label becomes longer and more complex, and this way, and this may have an unfavorable impact on consumer perception. So a longer list of allergens does not necessarily means a less safe product, as Irene told before, but it can easily be interpreted that way by consumers. Yeah. So, yeah, from a scientific and regulatory perspective, the responsibility of the manufacturer should remain focused on ensuring the safety of the product independently of the label. This is my opinion. The label is important, a communication tool, but it is not by itself a demonstration of safety.
Thank you very much, Carla. Thank you very much. So, we are at the conclusion of our program of today. So, as I said in the chat at the beginning of today's session, we will send you an email in the coming days containing a survey, a recording of the webinar, the slides, and the Q&A session. So we receive also other questions, but due to the fact that we are a little bit in delay, we are going to reply it and send it by this document. Additionally, if you, for more news and updates from Cotecna, we will providing a link for the newsletter subscription. So we hope that you find this webinar of today beneficial. A big thanks to our speakers. Carla, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you to you.
Thank you also, Irene, to be with us with this important topic and sharing expertise. So have a great day, everyone, and see you in the next webinar session of Neotron and Cotecna. Enjoy the day.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.